This is Discovery Class. Thank you for dropping by. If you want to pour yourself an extra coffee, go right ahead. If you got an extra one, you might want to pass it over to me. Today I want to tell you a story of a modern-day businessman. The automotive industry in North America has been made up of what is called the Big Three: General Motors, the Ford Motor Company, Chrysler Corporation. There has only been one man in the history of those three companies who has been the president of two of those corporations. He was first the president of Ford. Then one of the other companies saw what a great president he was and what a great job he was doing, so they stole him away and they made him their president. And I'm talking about the Chrysler Corporation. The man's name was Lee Iacocca. He joined the Ford Motor Company in 1946 to start out. He's the personality that I want to talk about today here in Discovery Class. After his wonderful tenure at Ford, he did even more remarkable things when he moved over to Chrysler. Why am I telling you this? Brentview Church has just lost its esteemed senior pastor, Dr. David Spate. He has served our church as senior pastor for 19 years. The Lord has now stirred his nest, and he's moving on from us after a sterling career of service. Now, our church is going to have to strike a pulpit committee, and they're going to find a replacement, which will not be an easy task. Today, I'm going to give you some helpful hints on how to go about finding a new senior pastor for Brentview. And if you're going to be on the pulpit committee and the search committee, you might want to tune in and hear what I'm going to say, because you may pick up a couple of ideas that you could use in your work. But before I get to that, I'm going to lay the foundation of the senior secular businessman that's going to be in our topic today, and see if there isn't a parallel in choosing the president for Chrysler and choosing the pastor for Brentview. What Chrysler did in calling Lee Iacocca from Ford is what we're going to be doing when Brentview's new pastor arrives here in Calgary, whoever that shepherd may be. And we don't know, and neither does he or she. But one thing I can tell you, that person right now is at the top of his or her game. He's doing a splendid job in his church, in his seminary, wherever he's serving, and he doesn't want to leave. Our job is to find him or her, show him the wonderful prospects of this church, and see if it wouldn't be possible that he could come to Calgary and lead us too. Iacocca had no intention of leaving Ford. He was right at the best of his ability as a president. Well, that's what we want. We want somebody that's doing a splendid job where they are, and they don't know that we're coming after them, because what they're doing there, we would like them to do here. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about Lee Iacocca. He was born in Allentown, Pennsylvania, October the 15th, 1924. His parents were Italian immigrants. His dad worked at the steel mill. Iacocca graduated from the Allentown High School with honors. He went to Lehigh University in neighboring Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and there he graduated, and his degree was in electrical industrial engineering. From there, he went on to Princeton University under a Wallace Fellowship, and he earned his doctorate. He joined Ford Motor Company in 1946. He got into sales and marketing, and he climbed right up the ladder in Ford management, and he gained the national recognition in 1956 for something that he came up with, and that was a banner year for Ford. They sold more cars that model year than they had ever sold in any other year before, and it was all Iacocca. He invented a little slogan that said 56 for 56. What that was, you could take any model of Ford's cars or trucks. It didn't matter if it was an F-150 pickup. Maybe it was one of their number Land Cruiser or Fairlane, or it could have been a Lincoln. All you did is go into your dealership and they will take 20% down as a payment, and then you would make 3 years payments of $56. And then the car was yours. No interest or carrying charge. Ford did wonderful with that. Well, on December the 10th, 1970, having worked for Ford in that department, he was made president of Ford Motor Company. Have you ever heard of the Ford Mustang? That was Lee Iacocca. Have you ever heard of the Ford Pinto? Gasoline was getting expensive and they wanted to have a 4-cylinder car. That was Lee Iacocca, the Pinto. Now, Ford stock was rising. Chrysler stock was falling. They were in very serious trouble. And as a result, they said, I wonder, is there a possibility that we could go to Ford and very quietly approach Lee Iacocca and ask him if he would come to our company and lead us? Well, he did. And when he came over, he saw the finances were in such poor shape that he went down to Washington and he sat before the Senate Judicial Committee and he told that committee, I want to borrow some money, and it's going to be a lot of money, and you're not going to give it to me, but I'm going to tell you I still want it. And if you give it to me, I can guarantee I'll pay it back, and my corporation will climb and its stock will triple. Well, they did. They gave him the money, and Iacocca went with Chrysler, and he paid it back 7 years before it was due. The stock went through the roof. Iacocca brought along with him a man by the name of, get it here, Hal Sperlich, S-P-E-R-L-I-C-H. Hal Sperlich was working for Ford when Iacocca was at Ford. And he said to Iacocca over there, he says, do you think we could make a minivan? And Ford said, nah, we don't want a minivan. We've got enough stuff on our line. We don't need another car. We don't need a minivan. Iacocca brought Sperlich over to Chrysler. And that minivan became the Grand Caravan. And it became the best-selling van in the history of any of the big three. Now, along came something big. Because they now had some money, Iacocca went with some of the bucks in his pocket and he went to AMC, American Motor Company. They're the ones that made a Jeep. They bought AMC. And I'm amazed that some of the people that come to my class, they drive Jeep Cherokees. Do you know why they drive them? Because of Lee Iacocca. It was under that mastermind that he brought from AMC that whole idea of Chrysler creating a Jeep. Well, what I've said to you is a man that was amazing. He went on the national network and he made some very interesting statements. Here's one of them. He said to the competition, if you can find a better car, buy it. And he had another one, he said, the pride is back. Now, for 42 years, Lee Iacocca was president of two of the world's largest automobile corporations. He had on his wall in his office a pinup sheet with 6 commandments. They were 6 statements of management. Leadership qualities. From those 6 ingredients, he produced a recipe that made up the cake that satisfied the business world on how to lead people. Now, I'm going to take those 6 lists that he had on his wall, and I'm going to apply them to Brentview as we go out and look for a pastor. Come along with me. Here they are. I'll read them to you and then I'll explain them. 1, hire the best. 2, keep a hot list of what you're trying to do. 3, say it in English and keep it short. 4, never forget the line makes the money. 5, lay out the size of your playing field. 6, Keep some mavericks around. The new pastor, chosen by the Brentview Church, is someone who's going to lead people. And in this recipe of these 6 ingredients, come with me and let's see if we can't apply it to what a pastor would look like if we were to choose him for our church. 1, hire the best. Nothing makes a CEO look better than talented people around him. Paul told Timothy in his letter in chapter 3, verse 1, 1 Timothy, this is out of the Message Bible. If anyone wants to provide leadership in a church, good, but there's some preconditions. The leadership must be well thought of. Next, he must be committed to his wife, cool, collected, accessible, and hospitable. Next, he must know what he's talking about. Next, not pushy, but gentle. Not thin-skinned. He must handle his own personal affairs well. Attentive to his own children and having their respect. And finally, outsiders must think well of him. When I was a student at seminary in Toronto in the late 50s, 4 blocks from our seminary was a preacher in the Avenue Road Church by the name of A.W. Tozer. A.W. Tozer wrote many wonderful books. You've probably read one, Knowledge of the Holy, among them. Tozer was as good a preacher as he was a writer. His church had a beautiful big circular horseshoe balcony, and the church was always packed. Tozer was a short man, just a little wee short fellow. He stood on an orange crate behind this huge pulpit. They hired the best when they brought Tozer in. Do you know who they had in the balcony way over in the corner, taking up that whole corner? Students from Osgoode Hall. What was that? Well, that was the law school down on Queen. And the professors made all those students in their first year come and hear A.W. Tozer. Well, why? Because they wanted to hear a man that knew how to preach. And they wanted to follow his logic. Because one day they're going to present their case in front of a lawyer or in front of a judge, and that judge is going to have to follow their logic. Where are they going to learn their logic? Well, they learned it from A.W. Tozer. He was one of the best preachers, I think, that southwestern Ontario ever had. Why was he so good? Well, he always knew how to introduce a subject, and he also knew how to close a subject. He always had an outline. Tozer never prayed before he preached. One day I interviewed him in his office and I said, Dr. Tozer, why don't you pray before you preach? He said, I don't want to put him to sleep before I start. He said, I've already prayed over what I'm going to say, and I'm not going to pray in front of them and put them to sleep before they hear what I have to say. He said this, he said, when I was preparing, Ron, my whole preparation was this: may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. He said, when I was preparing all those hours and getting my talk, I didn't have to pray before I spoke. The Lord already had been accepting what I had prepared. Never forgot that. So the recipe for a good preacher: hire the best. 2, have a hot list of what you're trying to do. Iacocca, no matter how complex your business is, he said, what you should have in your priorities, it should all fit on a single sheet of paper of 8.5 by 11. I've never seen a complex business plan that couldn't be boiled down to a single page of priorities. The scripture put it this way for the preacher: study to show yourself approved, a workman that needs not to be ashamed of his work, rightly dividing the word of truth. That's 2 Timothy 2. The term rightly dividing is a very interesting expression in the Greek. It means boil down the truth so even that a child can understand. Rightly dividing the truth. One of the wonderful things that I've learned in my life is that the Lord has put around me people that I have really enjoyed their company. Have you ever heard of Peter Craigie? Dr. Peter Craigie, he was the head of the religious department over here at the University of Calgary. He had his doctorate in ancient and Near Eastern studies. He was a Hebrew scholar, but he was also a Ugaritic scholar. If there was any discoveries over in Baghdad and over in that middle Near East, and they would pick up something that they had been through the archaeology dig, and it had some ancient words that were Ugaritic, Peter Craigie's phone would ring first, because he knew 6 languages. And he was very generous with his time. I used to ask him if he'd come over and preach to our college career kids. He did. In the middle of the week, he'd come over and give them the 10 Commandments. I asked him, do you think, Peter, if I could come over and I could audit your class in Hebrew and sit in the corner, I won't say a word. Yes, Ron, I'd love to have you come. And I did. And he was outstanding. He was the prince among teachers. We studied Ruth, we studied Judges, we studied Joshua. And he had that wonderful genius and skill to take a very complicated theme, and he could compress it into what you could understand. Just a little 8.5 by 11. Peter was a wonderful Christian. The students loved him. They never met a man that could rightly divide the truth like Peter. However, Peter was killed in a very tragic accident. And it was a car accident out in the mountains. His wife was driving, and he was killed. He's buried out in the cemetery in Cochrane. I visited his graveside the other day in preparation for this. I just wanted to remember what Peter did for me, what he did for Brentview, what he meant to his students. If you go to the university, you'll notice that one of the great buildings, Craigie Hall, is named after Peter. What a glorious man. 3, say it in English and keep it short. We live in a day of double talk. Have you ever heard so much mumbo jumbo? I've never heard so many adjectives, so many adverbs, so many nouns, so many verbs during this lockdown. Iacocca asked one of his plant managers to write a paper on a particular problem they were facing. He got back to Iacocca and he gave him 15 pages. He tried to impress Iacocca, I guess, with the depth of his vocabulary. Iacocca called him into his office and he said, I wonder if you could explain this paper to me. He did. And he explained the whole 15 pages in 2 sentences. Iacocca said, well, why didn't you say it in English the first time? Why didn't you keep it short? He was told to write the way he talked. Scripture says, shun profane babbling. In other words, keep it short. Say it in English. And that's what Iacocca demanded of his staff. 4, never forget the line makes the money. What does that mean? Well, how do you parcel authority? And how do you parcel accountability? Iacocca had a simple axiom that helped him manage conflict within an organization. When the chips were down, the assembly line where they make the cars, that staff makes the money, not your staff in the office. They don't make a dime. In other words, don't hire a pastor who spends all his time in the office and he doesn't know where the congregation lives, where they work, where their kids go to school, who their friends are. Do they like the Calgary Flames or the Stampeders? In other words, he calls his sheep by name and they follow him. Never forget, the line makes the money. Pastor, leave your office and get out and find out where your people live. Who are they? I had a wonderful grandma growing up on the farm. She always had time for me. She lived on the other farm near us, and I'd go over on my bike and I'd visit Grandma. And she really liked me too. She knew what I liked to wear. She knew what I liked to eat. She knew what I liked to drink. She made the best homemade pies and tarts from her garden and the best grape juice from her grape arbor. She mended the patches on my overalls. Well, you've got a grandma like that. That's what she does for you. So I'm not saying anything you don't know. The other day I ran across this little poem. Where have all the grandmas gone? I'll give it to you. In the dim and distant past, when life's tempo wasn't fast, Grandma used to rock and knit, crochet, tat, and babysit. When the kids were all in a jam, they could always call on Gram. In that day of gracious living, Grandma was the gal for giving. But today, she's in the gym, exercising to keep slim. She's off touring with the bunch, or taking clients out to lunch. Going north to ski or curl. All in her days are all a whirl. Nothing seems to stop or block her, now that Grandma's offered rocker. He calls his sheep by name, and they follow him. Listen to those on the line, because they're the ones that make the money. You that are in the bench, you that are in Encore, you that are teaching Sunday school, you that have our church picnic, you're the line. We have to listen to you. And don't choose a pastor that doesn't. Finally, 5, lay out the size of the playing field. Iacocca let his managers of the various departments become freewheelers. He set the boundaries for them, and then he turned them loose to do their job. They, in turn, were very creative. They worked long hours, they come up with new ideas, and they were rewarded accordingly. Our new pastor will be our CEO. But we already have a playing field. We have youth. We have young adults. We have children. We have college, career. We have musicians. We have missions. We have senior adults. We have weddings, births, funerals. That's not going to stop. The key to the success of the playing field is how well he or she lets us operate without upsetting the apple cart. Continue in the things which you have learned and you have been assured of, knowing that they will make you wise unto salvation, said Paul to Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:14. I pastored a church in Detroit where Lee Iacocca was president of Chrysler. And for a number of years, I watched the men come and go into our congregation from that corporation, Chrysler. I like the city of Detroit. Our daughter was born there. Many of Iacocca's engineers were the members of our church, as I said. Iacocca insisted that they drive one of their new cars or trucks that they made, and our church parking lot was really a test ground for what was the latest off the Chrysler assembly line, cars, Jeeps, pickup trucks, and they kept logs in their vehicles to describe their feelings of how it handled. What changes should they make if they made any changes? What did their kids think? How did their wife enjoy driving it? All of those things they put on the log. In other words, what have you learned in this vehicle? And what assurance has it that our future models are going to be even better? Finally, 6, keep some mavericks around. Lee Iacocca had a maverick in his own personal family. He had 2 daughters. He loved them with all his heart. He used to come home and tell them his office stories and talk about personalities that he worked with that day. Strong differences between management and union, and the threatening strikes that might be coming up. That sort of thing. His daughter Mary was particularly insightful. She never let her dad get off into a single mindset. She had a very cute expression. Daddy, keep cooking the pudding, meaning she always fed her daddy a different point of view. She was a true contrarian, never took anything for value and granted. She would, according to Icoca, she filtered it and she homogenized it. She pasteurized it. She synthesized it. And she kept cooking the pudding so that whatever he was telling her from the office, he had to make absolutely certain he knew what he was talking about. Daddy couldn't wait to come home from the office to seek little Mary's wonderful ideas and how to solve some of the most complex national rationales in the automotive industry. But there was a problem. Do you know what the problem was? Little Mary contracted an illness. In the prime of her life, she came down with type 1 diabetes. Have you ever had sickness in your family? One of your kids, maybe your wife, maybe you? Have you had sickness? That could become your maverick, you know. Over time, Mary died. Iacocca was crushed. His little maverick was gone. But he did something remarkable. In her honor, he became the national spokesman for the Diabetes Society, and he raised awareness of diabetes all over the United States, higher than it had ever been. You might want to quiz our new pastor when he comes. Ask him if he's got any mavericks in his life. Has he ever suffered? Has he had any personal suffering? Or more profound? If he has, that'll be a wonderful teacher for him. Because that teacher is actually better than any earned degree you could find at university. Lee Iacocca rose to the highest achievement as a man when his little Mary was struck down with diabetes. She used to tell her father these affectionate words, "Daddy, if you can find a better daddy, I'll buy it." And then she'd give him a big hug. You know, suffering is a horrible thing. I know whereof Iacocca stands. I have 2 boys and a girl. My 2 boys have been my mavericks. My oldest son, he's in his mid-50s now. He lives in a house over in Victoria with his wife and kids. And he has what Mary has, stage 1 diabetes. He gives himself an insulin shot 4 times a day, but he runs for his life. And it's interesting that around his house he has a number of trails, and he goes out into those trails after work, and he runs maybe 5 kilometers, 10. He does marathons. One day he did the marathon in the Victoria, and he heard this clippity-clop, 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 and he looked behind him, and who do you think was running behind him? A Dutchman in his wooden shoes. Well, he wouldn't let that man pass him. He ran all the way to the finish line with that behind him. It was almost like a metronome on his piano, and he could hear the clickety-clop in the rhythm as he ran. If you have a son with diabetes, you've got a maverick. I have a second son, and he has schizophrenia, mental illness. And he's had that since he was 25 years of age. Both my boys now are in their 50s. Have you ever watched someone who has mental illness who doesn't take his meds? Well, my son that has mental illness is off his meds. And I won't tell you how he's treating me right now. But I'll tell you this, that if you have mental illness in your home, here in our church, and nobody listens to you, and nobody gives you the time of day, why don't you have me come along, stand beside you? If you can find a better car, buy it. If you have a son that's a maverick and he's got diabetes, and nobody talks about it to you, why don't you have me come by? And we'll talk about it. And if you can find a better car, buy it. Here's our story. We've got the story here of a man who had a child who had a maverick in his life. There are a lot of mavericks in the Bible, you know. If you want to study in the Old Testament, a man by the name of Zebulun, the tribe of Zebulun, it says they jeopardized their lives unto death. Those are good soldiers. It says they were men of war, they had instruments of war, they were able to keep rank, and they were not of double heart. That's a maverick. Now, I've just given you an insight of what we're looking for in a new pastor. 6 things. Lee Iacocca had these 6 commandments on the wall behind his desk of how to be a corporate president. Well, let's in the back of our mind pretend that we are looking at those and we're going to say, here are 6 commandments for Brentview Church to go and find a pastor. Hire the best. Keep a hot list of what you're trying to do. Say it in English and keep it simple. Don't forget the line makes the money. Lay out the size of the playing field. And finally, keep a maverick around. Now, Discovery class, I'm a member of Brentview Church too. I'm going to listen to this new pastor that we choose every Sunday. I want to hear the best. Don't you? I think we can find the best. We're going to send our pulpit committee forth, and I know they're not going to disappoint us. They're going to bring home into our church an A.W. Tozer, Peter Craigie, not sure, but whoever it is, I know we trust them, and they're going to do the very best for us. Well, the time is gone now. Thanks you for joining my Discovery class. Will I see you next week? I hope so. Until then, you have a good week.